Grandpa, are you sure there's no one in the shed? I whispered almost inaudibly, peering into the darkness outside the window, trying to make out the silhouette of the small, rickety structure in the middle of the garden. It was cobbled together from scraps of wood and junk, barely holding itself upright. The only light in the kitchen came from a small desk lamp. My grandfather sat at the table, engrossed in repairing a broken iron that had stopped working the day before. "Are you going to ask me this every night?" he grumbled, clearly annoyed. "I don't know," I muttered, lowering my head and sitting down beside him. "I just think I saw something moving out there." "That's the thing, you think you saw something. When you start imagining things, it's time to start praying," he said, not looking up from his work. "Come on, stop fussing. There's no one out there, and there never has been. Just my tools and some old junk. That's all that's in there." "But they can't move on their own," I insisted. Grandpa put the screwdriver down and turned to me. "Alex, you're really surprising me, honestly. You're sitting here, a grown boy, asking such silly questions. The wind blew, the grass moved, and you got scared. Is that the kind of man you're becoming?" He shook his head, disappointed. "It was just the wind." My grandfather was a peculiar man. In my short life so far, he had become both my mother and father. He was the only family I had left, the only person who cared for me, even if only a little. Though, if I'm being honest, sometimes I wondered if his life would have been easier without me. My mother had left me when I was just a baby, moving abroad. I didn't even remember her. My grandparents had raised me, but a few years ago, Grandma had passed away. Cancer took her from us. Now it was just Grandpa and me. He prepared me for school, disciplined me, sometimes scolded me, and even hit me. He was a strict man, a former officer in the Soviet Army, and he raised me like a soldier. Kind words or praise were rare. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard any, but I was grateful for the roof over my head, the hot meals, and maybe even the discipline. He always said that if I listened to him, I'd grow up to be a decent man. So I listened, and if he said it was just the wind near the shed, then it must have been. But what if it wasn't the wind? That thought kept me awake at night. I lay in bed, staring at the patterns on the carpet, listening to Grandpa's loud snoring, and wondering, what else could it have been? Maybe an animal had wandered into the garden, or a neighbor's chicken. But their chickens were white. I would have seen it, even in the dark. I decided I'd check in the morning. Turning off the light, I thought maybe there'd be some tracks or signs left behind. Suddenly, I felt a wave of anxiety. My body broke out in goosebumps, and I hid under the blanket. What if it was some kind of monster? But Grandpa always said monsters didn't exist, and I'd been punished more than once for my wild imagination. It always turned out that no one was hiding under my bed or in the closet. I was probably just overthinking things. I needed to sleep. I had school tomorrow. After tossing and turning for a while, I finally drifted off. In the morning, Grandpa woke me with his usual gruff, booming voice. Oatmeal and tea with cookies were already waiting for me in the kitchen. Despite his strictness, he always showed some care, and I appreciated that. Every morning I'd eat a full bowl of porridge, and it kept me full until lunch. I didn't get a chance to check the shed that morning. I was too sleepy and grumpy. The school day flew by, and by 2 o'clock, I was back home. Grandpa wasn't inside when I arrived. He was out in the garden digging and tinkering with something. "Grandpa, I'm home," I shouted through the window. "Good. I'll finish up here, check your homework, and you can eat. Food's on the stove," he replied. The shed was open. Grandpa had been in and out, grabbing tools, shovels, rakes, and whatnot. He'd probably trampled any tracks from the night before. I kept thinking about it as I ate my soup. Soon, Grandpa came inside. He checked my homework, and since I hadn't brought home any bad grades, he was pleased. "Good job," he said, smiling and praising me for an A in literature. "I mowed all the grass near the shed," he added proudly. "You did great, Grandpa," I replied. And so our days went on. Weeks turned into months. I grew older, moving up to the 7th grade. One cold, rainy evening, we sat in the kitchen, drinking tea and playing cards. He'd taught me how to play fool years ago. As we played, I noticed he was cheating, putting the wrong cards down. "Well, Grandpa, what are you doing? That's not the trump suit," I said, confused. "Oh, I can't see a thing. Where are my glasses?" he muttered, patting his pockets. "I must have left them in the shed. I was sharpening knives earlier. Go get them for me, will you? Take a flashlight and put on something warm. It's nasty out there." "Okay," I mumbled reluctantly. I put on Grandpa's old jacket, grabbed the flashlight, and headed outside. I'll admit my imagination runs wild. The weather was terrible, pitch black, and my mind started conjuring up unsettling images. The shed didn't help. I walked down the steps. The shed was always open. There was nothing valuable inside, so Grandpa never bothered with the lock. I approached it, shining the flashlight inside. There was no light, so I had to rely on the beam. Fighting my childish fear, I stepped inside. I wanted to prove to Grandpa that I wasn't just some scared kid, but a brave young man. I walked in and nothing happened. The occasional flash of lightning made me jump, but that was it. I grabbed Grandpa's glasses from the shelf and was about to leave when something caught my eye, a dark, reddish puddle in the corner of the shed. I looked closer and stepped back. A dead chicken lay in the corner. Feathers and blood were everywhere. I didn't stick around to examine it further. I slammed the door shut and ran back to the house. "Grandpa, Grandpa," I shouted as I reached the porch. "What's all the yelling about? What happened?" he asked, annoyed. "There's a dead chicken in the shed," I blurted out. "What chicken?" he asked, confused. I handed him his glasses. "Here, now you can see better," I said. He put on his jacket and went outside with me trailing behind. "Good heavens, what's this?" he exclaimed, shining the flashlight on the dead bird. He picked it up by the neck and examined it. Strange. Must have been a hawk or something. The body was torn apart, guts and feathers scattered everywhere. "Who killed it, Grandpa?" I asked. "Who knows, maybe some animal got in," he said, though he seemed uneasy. Even as a kid, I could tell he was trying to reassure himself. Our property was surrounded by a decent fence, and the shed door, though unlocked, was always closed. I doubted an animal could have gotten in, and I think Grandpa did too, but I didn't argue. If he said it was an animal, then it was. No other options. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if it wasn't an animal? What if it was something else? The next day, I told my teacher that Grandpa had disappeared. Our neighbor, Uncle Nick, took me in for a few days, saying Grandpa would probably come back. But he never did. Not that day, not the next, not even a week later. The police got involved, searching the village and the nearby forests. Of course, they didn't find him in the shed. The blood on the wall turned out to be from the chicken. Eventually, I ended up in an orphanage. Life there wasn't bad. I made friends and felt safe. But there was one thing. Yesterday, my best friend Steve went out for a smoke at night. When he came back, he said, "Guys, there's someone near the shed." My heart sank. There's a small shed on the orphanage grounds, similar to ours, old, wooden, and falling apart. It's where we keep cleaning supplies and old junk. "Alex, what's wrong?" Steve called after me as I ran to the window. The shed door creaked open, and in the light of the street lamp, I saw a dark, long limb reaching out. The silhouette was wrapped in tattered rags, eerily resembling my late grandfather.